Now, while Hamas may be Israel's main enemy in the Gaza Strip, another terror group there, the Iran-backed Islamic Jihad, has also been raising its profile lately. Its latest move is to unveil on Iranian TV a weapons manufacturing facility inside Gaza, including an arsenal that it says includes new rockets that it can hit not only Tel Aviv, but even targets north of it. Defense correspondent Jonathan Regev has that story.
When tensions flare along the Israel-Gaza border, Israel points its finger at Hamas, claiming that the organization which controls Gaza is responsible for any violence originating from there. While that may be true, there is another organization which Israel is keeping its eye on. In a new documentary film, the Islamic Jihad, the second strongest group operating in the Gaza Strip, claims it has developed new and precise missiles that can hit Tel Aviv and even further north, threatening to turn Israeli cities into hell. The film was broadcast on Iranian television, and the missiles are said to be Iranian-made, not surprising considering the close ties between the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Tehran.
Today, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad has the ability to stand up to the occupation and fight in any way, on the land, in the sea, and in the air.
It appears that Iran, which has a great deal of influence in Lebanon via Hezbollah, is trying to duplicate this in Gaza. Whereas Hamas is not only fighting Israel, but is also in charge of daily life, the Ayatollah hopes that the Islamic Jihad, just like Hezbollah in Lebanon, will find itself at the forefront of the fight against Israel.
I think it's no coincidence that recently Islamic Jihad started showing off its accurate missiles. I think this is a message from Iran to Israel that we could escalate the situation. So I think the Islamic Jihad will play a even more important part in Iran's military strategy in the region.
So far, the Islamic Jihad is not challenging the rule of Hamas on the Strip, but an order from Tehran could change that, and then Israel will not only have Iranian proxies along its northern borders, it may also find them knocking at its southern door. Jonathan Regev, I-24 News.
Joining us now is Sim Tack, a global analyst for Stratfor Worldview. Sim, often there is a very big difference between the videos and threats made of this kind and the actual reality. So what's your take on what they claim they have, this new kind of missile?
So I think one of the important things to realize is that when we're talking about claims of how far these new missiles can actually reach into Israel, we need to take that with a grain of salt. It's probably true that Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as well as other groups within Gaza, are developing new rockets with longer ranges than they had before. But we'll have to see them actually demonstrate the capability to strike into areas north of Tel Aviv before we can simply take that as a fact.
But Sim, looking at that video, even what they have there, even if it could just hit Tel Aviv or even just the outskirts, looks fairly impressive. How much of a threat does that pose strategically to Israel?
So we've seen in past escalations, particularly in 2012 and 2014, that the ability to launch rockets all the way to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and even Dimona has created significant disruptions on the Israeli side. This really hits at the daily life of large quantities of civilians, which in the immediate outskirts of Gaza isn't always the case.
So, Sim, even if this threat is not real in the sense that the missiles have the full capability that the Islamic Jihad is claiming, what do you think the significance is of putting out this video now, making the claims, and no less on Iranian television?
So I think that Palestinian Islamic Jihad is really trying to magnify their importance within the Gaza Strip, because this video is geared not only towards Israel, where it is basically saying, hey, we have these new capabilities, we are a significant threat to you. You've mostly been spending time talking to Hamas, but we are here as well, and we're an important player. And secondary to that, Palestinian Islamic Jihad is also boosting their image within the Gaza Strip, where, of course, it is in a competition with Hamas to try and be more relevant.
Sim, I have heard some security analysts here in Israel put forward a theory that Iran's motivation here in having Islamic Jihad in Gaza raise its profile might be to, in essence, distract Israel's security attention from the north, from Lebanon and Syria, where they're really boosting up their forces and their capabilities. Does that sound plausible to you?
I think there's definitely an interesting element in there where it might not be so much an attempt to distract Israel, because I think it'll be difficult to really distract Israeli capabilities from that border. But I think Iran is definitely trying to signal that it is active in different theaters surrounding Israel, and it has the ability to leverage those different theaters to cause additional trouble if Israel were to push too hard in the Syrian theater, for example.
Sim, going back to the Gaza Strip, Iran has been known to be a source of funding and weapons for Hamas as well. We were just talking about these groups sort of in competition with each other in Gaza. How would you describe, put into some context for our viewers, Iran's support of each of those groups, and how important it is for Iran to really be putting money and weapons into the Gaza Strip?
So I think an important thing to talk about there is the way in which Iran is trying to leverage these groups off of each other to achieve the objectives that are right in front of it, right? So as we were just talking about, Iran is dealing with significant Israeli pressure on the Syrian theater, but at the same time, Hamas has been engaged in negotiations with Israel. So in order to try and disrupt that process, to try and increase the pressure on Israel from the Gaza Strip, it could be very fruitful to raise the profile of a group like Palestinian Islamic Jihad in contrast with Hamas. So in a way, having these relationships with the different groups within Gaza helps them to pick and choose when different groups are more relevant or more pragmatic to be supporting actively.
Sim, as you mentioned earlier, we know from already in 2014 there were missiles that could, from Gaza, hit Tel Aviv, also threaten Ben Gurion Airport even. And yet, except for that one instance during that operation, they haven't been used. Of course, there's always the threat of an Israeli full-out assault or even incursion into Gaza. Is there a scenario in which Islamic Jihad would, in a sense, roll the dice and try to use those rockets?
So that's an important balancing equation that Palestinian Islamic Jihad has to figure out for itself. They can try to push escalation with Israel, but at the same time, Hamas is very dominant within the Gaza Strip. So if they push too far, and we've actually seen that recently in a much lower level incident where Palestinian Islamic Jihad militants were trying to launch rockets at Ashkelon, and Hamas operatives actually came and arrested those PIJ members. So if PIJ were to suddenly launch those long-range rockets at Tel Aviv without any kind of support from Hamas, it could be eliciting a serious crackdown against themselves within the Gaza Strip.
All right, Sim Tack in Belgium.